If your fantasy football league takes place on ESPN, this is a must-watch video for you. Inside of today's video, I will be going over the best 10 picks to make in ESPN fantasy football drafts based upon value. I took a look at all of the pre-draft rankings on ESPN and found 10 clear outliers, 10 guys going way too late based upon ESPN pre-draft rankings. And the best part about ESPN pre-draft rankings is that they are updated at a snail's pace, right? Even with all this crazy news happening in the NFL, it barely moves. So you're going to find some huge values on ESPN that I'm going to talk about in today's video. If you guys do end up enjoying, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button down below. It helps me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter, please do so at NotoriousFantasy. So without further ado, get your popcorn ready. The best 10 picks to make in ESPN fantasy football drafts this season. We begin with the first best pick to make in ESPN fantasy football drafts this season. Stefon Diggs, wide receiver of the Buffalo Bills. ESPN pre-draft ranking wide receiver 6 at pick number 13 in 12-team leagues right now. According to ESPN pre-draft ranking, Stefon Diggs is a second-round pick, which is laughable. Stefon Diggs should be considered a top 8, top 7, maybe even a top 6 pick in a majority of fantasy football drafts this season. They have guys like Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, Devontae Adams, and Tony Pollard all ranked ahead of Stefon Diggs. Now, if you guys have been watching the channel for a while, you would know I'm a huge Devontae Adams guy. I'm a huge Tony Pollard guy for the 2023 fantasy football season, but when push comes to shove, I am taking Stefon Diggs over both of those guys every single time and twice on Sunday. I am also a big Derrick Henry guy, but if you are taking Derrick Henry inside of the first round of fantasy football drafts in the year 2023, you've lost your mind. Stefon Diggs had an amazing season last year, despite the fact that Josh Allen got hurt around halfway into the season, and that really affected Josh Allen as well as Stefon Diggs' play. Yet, he was the wide receiver 4 in PPR and the wide receiver 5 in PPR points per game. He played in all 17 games, 5th in targets, 3rd in receptions, 5th in receiving yards, and 2nd in total touchdowns. He was 6th in yards per team pass attempt, 17th in yards per target, 9th in fantasy points per target, and 4th in fantasy points per route run. Stefon Diggs should be a mortal lock of the century to be a first-round pick in your fantasy football drafts. The fact that if everyone's drafting based upon the pre-draft rankings, that you can get Diggs at the end of the first or at the beginning of the second round is absolutely hilarious. That is a guy that is the definition of a must-draft player on ESPN Fantasy Football. Moving to the second player, Josh Jacobs, running back of the Las Vegas Raiders. ESPN ranking, running back 8 at pick number 19. Now, Josh Jacobs recently put his signed that big Hancock onto the contract. He is going to play this year with the Raiders, which is a shock to some people. For me, I've been telling people since Jump Street, Josh Jacobs is going to start for the Raiders week 1, but everyone panicked. Everyone got their panties in a bunch, and now come week 1, guess what? He's going to be the guy. He's ranked behind Derrick Henry and Garrett Wilson, which is incredibly shocking to me. You can argue that based upon how Josh Jacobs was taking defenses to pound town last season, he should be ranked ahead of Barkley, Chubb, Pollard, and Henry. He was the running back 3 in PPR as well as in PPR points per game last season. 17 games played. He was 2nd in carries, 1st in rushing yards, 11th in targets, 10th in receptions, 8th in receiving yards, and 6th in total touchdowns. He signed a 1-year deal worth up to $12 million. They are going to run this man into the dirt. He's going to be in the dirt for so long, he might find the fucking Undertaker down there. Josh Jacobs was a guy that for years we were calling to the fantasy gods up above saying, please give Josh Jacobs more receiving opportunities. And they did it last year. Josh McDaniel turned this man from a guy that I thought was going to be the leader in a running back by committee into a workhorse running back. 1st in yards created, 18th in yards per touch, 11th in juke rate. I know, Nick, Jimmy Garoppolo isn't very good, but ultimately you don't need Jimmy Garoppolo to be Patrick Mahomes for this team to run the rock a ton with Josh Jacobs. Again, at pick number 19, laughable. Make sure you guys are targeting him on ESPN. At number 3, we got Jalen Hurts, quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles. ESPN pre-draft rankings, quarterback 3 at pick 28. Hurts is ranked as my quarterback number 1, quarterback numero uno, and he goes behind Pat Mahomes and Josh Allen. But most importantly, Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow go within 12 picks of Hurts. And while I love Lamar Jackson this season, I would rather just pay up in the beginning of the 3rd round to get Jalen Hurts over dilly-dallying and waiting until the 4th round and then having to pay up for a guy like Joe Burrow or Lamar Jackson. I feel like Jalen Hurts is a guarantee to finish as a top 3 quarterback and could easily be the number 1 quarterback in fantasy football because of his crazy rushing upside. 1st in carries last season, 4th in rushing yards, and 1st in rushing touchdowns. He scored 13 rushing touchdowns last season. He has an excellent offensive line. He is one of the best wide receiver cores in football. A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. He also has Dallas Goedert, and they brought in DeAndre Swift for Jalen Hurts. This is the perfect situation for Jalen Hurts to succeed. And again, people throw stones. They'll say, Nick, he's a running back. He's not actually a quarterback. Well, he ranked 4th in true passer rating and 4th in QBR last season at the beginning of the 3rd round. You can get Jalen Hurts. You feel comfortable every single week playing him at quarterback, and he has the upside to dance all over your opponent's corpse after you beat the dog shit out of him because Jalen Hurts drops 30+ fantasy football points. We move now to best pick number 4, Calvin Ridley, wide receiver of the Jacksonville Jaguars. ESPN pre-draft rankings, wide receiver 17 at pick 36. Pick 36 is the last pick in a 12-team league inside of the 3rd round, so in some leagues, he's going to fall to you in the 4th round. ESPN has DK Metcalf ranked 14 spots ahead of Calvin Ridley as the wide receiver 12 at pick 22. Now, I get why people like DK Metcalf, right? I get that the guy is built like a Greek god, like an Adonis. But at the end of the day, even with JSN potentially missing a couple of games, this offense has a lot of talent in it. They've got Lockett. They are going to have JSN. And Metcalf struggled on a points per game basis last year with just Lockett in the offense. Once JSN gets jolted into this equation, I think DK Metcalf is going to be struggling big time. They also have Higgins, Olave, Smith, and Debo ranked ahead of him, which I think is just flat out crazy. We saw in preseason yesterday up against the Dolphins, he took my Dolphins out back and whacked them with a lock in a sock. It was absolutely hard to watch. Calvin Ridley went to Pound Town against the Dolphins. All of the reports out of training camp are that this guy looks like he's never even left, like he hasn't played a game in a year and a half, right? The last time he played was those 5 games in 2021, but ultimately, Calvin Ridley has not missed a step. This Jacksonville Jaguars offense has one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, one of the best coaches in the NFL, and Calvin Ridley is the clear number 1 wide receiver in this offense, and this was a guy that just a couple of years ago, we were talking about how he could be one of the best receivers in the NFL. We were talking him up highly in fantasy football in 2021 before the season, right before he played in just 5 games. In 2020, when he played 15 games, he was the wide receiver 5 in PPR and the wide receiver 4 in PPR points per game with Julio Jones on the team. And this was not the Julio Jones that couldn't catch the fucking common cold, right? This was Julio Jones when he was still Julio Jones. And Calvin Ridley was still a menace to defenses. You better believe in Jacksonville. At the end of the 3rd round or the early 4th round, Calvin Ridley is a steal. At number 5, we have Darren Waller, tight end of the New York Football Giants, ESPN ADP rankings, pre-draft rankings, tight end 4 at pick 64. Pick 64. Why? Now, I get it. Kelsey, Andrews, and Hawkinson, they should be ranked ahead of him. I get it. You can argue for Waller versus Hawkinson, but the 6th round is disrespectful. We saw in preseason already how much they want to force Darren Waller the ball. Darren Waller, besides Saquon Barkley, is one of the most focal pieces of this offense. In the red zone, they are going to need to take a fucking SWAT team to stop this guy in the red zone. Daniel Jones has been peppering him all at training camp in the red zone. He was peppering him in that preseason game. This guy might average 6-7 targets per game, which is very hard to find at the tight end position. I legitimately think that Darren Waller could finish as the tight end 1 on the season. Now, is that probably going to happen? Of course not, because Travis Kelce is so elite and so is Mark Andrews. But I think Darren Waller has that chance, and in the 6th round, even with the injury history, I'm taking that upside every single time. Moving now to the best pick, number 6, we got Trevor Lawrence, quarterback of the Jacksonville Jaguars. ESPN pre-draft rankings, quarterback 9 at pick 74. I am one of the biggest Deshaun Watson truthers out there for fantasy football this season. I think Deshaun Watson is turning it around, and Deshaun Watson is going to play much better. But according to ESPN's pre-draft rankings, they have Watson ranked as the quarterback 8 and Lawrence as the QB 9. That feels disgusting. And I love Deshaun Watson this season for fantasy, but Trevor Lawrence is a much safer bet, and they have equal amount of upside. And the Jaguars offense probably has more talent. T-Law last season had an emergence, right? In his rookie season, Urban Meyer basically gave this guy a swirly in the toilet, right? He basically made everyone think that Trevor Lawrence wasn't the guy that everyone thought he was coming out of Clemson, one of the generational quarterback talents. Last year, quarterback 7 on the season and quarterback 13 in points per game. This guy was as efficient as it gets. 6th in true passer rating, 15th in QBR, 9th in accuracy rating, and he had the 6th most dropped passes in the NFL. He had a 4.3% passing touchdown rate. When you're a quarterback as good as Trevor Lawrence, that rate should be closer to 5% or even above 5%. So I think there is room for growth for Trevor Lawrence, especially with the addition of a receiver with as skilled of a set as Calvin Ridley. I am a huge fan of Trevor Lawrence this season. And again, going as the quarterback 9 is exploitable. You can make the argument that you could rank him inside the top 5. Now, do I have him ranked inside the top 5? Fuck no, baby. But could you argue for that? 100%. I'm loving Trevor Lawrence where you can get him right now on ESPN. Moving to pick number 7 here, Jordan Addison Ray. I want a bad bitch. Jordan Addison Ray, wide receiver of the Minnesota Vikings. ESPN pre-draft ranking, wide receiver 42 at pick 97. If you guys have enjoyed this far, hit that subscribe button down below, hit that like button. A list of guys going around 10 picks ahead of Jordan Addison, 10 picks earlier. Treylon Burks, dealing with an injury, the clear number 2 on a offense. Cortland Sutton, Jackson Smith-Njigba, who's hurt for multiple weeks. I can easily see Jordan Addison outscoring all of them. We know what this Minnesota Vikings offense wants to do. Their defense is soft as baby shit. The defense is terrible. They're going to have to throw the ball at one of the highest rates in the NFL. Adam Thielen is gonzo in Carolina. Adam Thielen last year ran 621 routes, which is 36.5 per game, ranking 2nd at wide receiver. Jordan Addison might be catapulted into a situation where he is seeing 30-plus routes every single game. Now, I know you can debate the talent of the rookie wide receivers in this class. Jackson Smith-Njigba this, Zay Flowers this, right? I get it, right? You can argue for any of these guys and how skilled they are one versus another. But what you can't argue is that the Minnesota Vikings is the best situation for a rookie wide receiver. JSN versus Addison, I think JSN's better, but Addison is in a better situation. Addison doesn't have DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Addison just has Justin Jefferson. And the solid thing about Justin Jefferson being on his team is now Jordan Addison never has to go up against the best DB. He doesn't have to get put on Revis Island, right? He's going to go out there against the number 2 corner and smoke him, roll him up in a blunt and smoke him. Jordan Addison is going to see so many targets. He was a first-round NFL draft pick, wide receiver 42 off the board. This guy could be a top 24 wide receiver in his rookie year. Come on, man. ESPN rankings, they're just bad. Moving now to player number 8. This one's even funnier. Elijah Moore, wide receiver of the Cleveland Browns. ESPN ranking, pre-draft rankings, wide receiver 54 at pick 120. Now I get, Nick, I've drafted Elijah Moore for years, and Elijah Moore has absolutely screwed me over. Elijah Moore sucks, this, that, and the other thing. For years, I have faded Elijah Moore. For years, I have told people not to draft Elijah Moore because Zach Wilson and the quarterbacks in New York for the Jets are terrible. But guess what? Guess what? Now, Elijah Moore has Deshaun Watson, who's been looking better. He is buried deeper in ADP, in pre-draft rankings on other websites, but wide receiver 54 is still hilarious. We have heard their head coach talk up. Kevin Stefanski has talked up Elijah Moore so much. We've seen in preseason. They want to use this guy as a gadget player all over the field. He's the clear second best wide receiver on this team behind Amari Cooper. I know if you look at his regular stats, they're not good because the Jets quarterbacks are terrible. They stink to high heaven. Again, the pre-draft rankings have DJ Chark, Darnell Mooney, Jerick McKinnon, and Jeff Wilson ranked ahead of Elijah Moore. Elijah Moore, in terms of efficiency, 25th in route win rate, 12th in target separation, 5th in true catch rate. But his problem was the quarterback play, 93rd in target accuracy. It was like Helen Keller and Stevie Wonder had a fucking passing competition trying to throw the ball to Elijah Moore as the Jets quarterback last season. Elijah Moore is much better than that. Pick 120, take advantage of that. And again, ESPN, they don't move their rankings. They're so slow. They move the rankings at a pace old people fuck. So Elijah Moore is going to continue to stay buried in these rankings, and you got to make sure you target him in your draft. There's an argument to make that he should be much higher, like a top 100 pick, and he's going to pick 120. Before we get on into the best picks on ESPN, number 9 and number 10, I'd like to give you guys a quick word for our friends, our sponsor over at Underdog Fantasy. If you are new to Underdog Fantasy, they're the best place to play fantasy football, best ball this summer. If you don't know what best ball is, it's the best part about fantasy football. It's the draft, and that's it. There's no waivers, no trades, and no in-season management. At the end of every single week, Underdog will automatically set your lineup for you and put the highest scores in there for you. So you don't have to worry about accidentally starting the wrong running back. They put the highest score into your lineup for you. And the coolest thing about Underdog is their tournaments. They have the biggest fantasy football contest tournament ever. $25 to enter, 150 max entries, $3 million to first place, $15 million in total prizes. If you're not about the big tournaments, they also have sit and goes, which is basically like your normal fantasy football league. You versus 11 other people for as low of a buy-in as $3, and the top 2 places make money. Make sure you guys check that out. Link in the video description. Promo code Notorious for a first match deposit bonus of up to $100. So if you deposit 100, you get an additional 150, additional 50, 25, additional 25. Minimum deposit is $10 on Underdog Fantasy. The best pick, number 9 on ESPN, is my guy Tank Bigsby of the Jacksonville Jaguars. ESPN ranking, running back 55 at pick 169. ESPN is rolling off some Hennessy. Round 15 for Tank Bigsby. We've seen Tank Bigsby in preseason almost look better than Travis Etienne. Now, he fumbled on the goal line against my Dolphins, but that's just what the Dolphins do. As a Dolphins fan for years, the defense would have the craziest bailout special, right? They would just let a defense run, or the offense run train on them, and then they get to the goal line, and miraculously, Javon Holland just smacks the ball out of someone's hand. They pick it up, and they run into the other end zone, right? Just what the Dolphins do, but it's okay, because after Bigsby fumbled, Doug Peterson wasn't like, oh, let's bench you. He was like, oh, let's just play you again, give you more carries. So again, Travis Etienne is still good, but he struggled last year on the goal line. He struggled at catching passes. Tank Bigsby is dominant in pass catching and is great on the goal line. So this could legitimately be a 60-40 snap split in favor of Etienne, and you can get that in the 15th round. If something was to happen to Etienne, knock on wood, Tank Bigsby could be elevated into being a top 12 guy in my fantasy football rankings any given week where Etienne isn't there. So even with Etienne, you can galaxy brain yourself into playing Tank Bigsby, but if something happened to Etienne, Tank Bigsby is going to be a monster for fantasy football. So in the 15th round, are the pre-draft rankings even watching preseason? Come on, man. Now moving to the final player. Now this one is just crazy. Rashod Master Bateman, wide receiver of the Baltimore Ravens. ESPN ranking wide receiver 70, pick 181. Round 16. Most leagues don't even have 16 rounds. He should be a top 10 round pick at least. You could argue top 9 round pick. You could argue if he was healthy all offseason, top 8 round pick. I think he has the best shot to at least week 1 be the number 1 receiver on the team. Now I know Rashod Bateman is not the definition of health. You look up injury-prone players in the dictionary, a picture of Rashod Bateman shows up. I get that he only played 6 games last season with 5 starts, but we saw it. You can see it with your own two eyes. The speed kills. This is a Todd Monken offense that is going to be throwing the ball a lot more. Rashod Bateman is, in my opinion, the #1 receiver on the team. And you're getting him at like a 6-round discount from Zay Flowers or Odell Beckham Jr. So again, even if you like Odell or Zay Flowers more, you have to just love that Rashod Bateman is free. He's free. You might be able to pick him up after your draft. If you already did your ESPN draft, he might be on the waiver wire. That's how crazy it is. I want pieces of great offenses. I know on a week-to-week basis, Rashod Bateman won't be consistent at all. But he's a guy I want on my team because he's a firecracker you can throw into your lineup, right? 1 week, he might score 7 points. The next week, he's going to hang his nuts on the defense and score 25-plus points. That's what I like out of Bateman. That's what I love out of late-round picks, especially a guy that is free like Rashod Bateman. Thank you guys all so much for watching. Let me know who your favorite pick to make on ESPN Fantasy Football is right now because their pre-draft rankings are absolute garbage, very exploitable. Make sure you guys click on the subscribe button, hit that like button down below if you ended up enjoying. I love you guys all so much. Hope you have a great one. And as always, good